Would you like for me to start, Xavier?
I was just waiting for the live stream to start. We are,
Okay.
but you are free to get going, Marcia.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Well, we begin every meeting, of course, with a value. And tonight, I offer the value of belonging, because when I get together with y'all and see your beautiful faces on my computer, I feel comforted and I feel connected and I feel that I can make a contribution. And I think that belonging, those values of being accepted and not judged and welcome, and that your contribution is welcomed, is needed, that you're needed, is what this task force is all about. So it is always a joy to be with you all. So I offer the value of belonging. Does everybody agree that that will hold the center of our circle, of our discussion and our plans today? Fantastic. Thank you. Turn it over to you, Xavier.
Thank you, and welcome again, everyone. This is our October edition, October 2022 edition of a Community Safety Wellness Task Force meeting. For those who are joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. I don't know if you knew what you were getting yourself into, but this is a very lively and powerful group of residents who care deeply about issues of safety and wellness in our community and care deeply about this community. We normally do announcements at the beginning. We thought we'd move those to the end and get right into it. We had a agenda item to talk about whole schools, and we don't have our guest with us just now, so we will move forward to your area, Manju, to give us an update on the communications plan that we started talking about last month, if that's okay. Thank you. And she may need screen sharing, I'm not sure. She does.
Hello all, my name is Manju, she, her, and I am going to be sharing back some ideas that we talked about last time around how to do outreach with our community to get input on the recommendations that we'll be presenting towards the end of our task force, and then having developed those recommendations with input from the community, sharing it back out with the community to help neighbors talk about how they want to put these ideas to use. So I want to mention to the public that in the intervening month, our roundtable, which is the crisis response roundtable, reached out to the task force with an idea about hosting a town hall using a charrette style format. A charrette is like a collective design process to work through a complex problem with all of the stakeholders over time. And our thought was to do it in November. We received some great feedback from Mike and Jesse, and I know we have it divided into two sections in our agenda to first talk about our outreach plan and then talk about this charrette idea. I'm wondering if we can kind of weave them together.
Feel free to flow. Yes, feel free to flow.
And so, yeah, maybe I can share the kind of big picture of what we heard last time and how I synthesized it. And then Mike and Jesse, would y'all be open to sharing the things that we've talked about around the charrette idea? Okay, thanks. So with that, y'all would think with how long we've been living on the internet, I would be prepared to share it in a heartbeat, but I need an extra moment. All right. Here we are. So sharing. This is what we talked about last time. We talked about what are our goals as the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force, who are groups we need to partner with to achieve our goals, how do we intend to engage community members around the task force recommendations, and what are some of the major benchmarks in our outreach plan. I was looking at those ideas and tried to kind of work backwards from those goals and sequence the steps that we talked about using this mural tool. And here's how I kind of remixed it. So thinking about it in terms of the groups that y'all mentioned, here's just a few of them, listing them here. And we know there's many other organizations who our roundtables have been working with. And so I'm hoping we can take a little bit more time to flesh out who do you hope we talk to over the next several months to get their input on more recommendations and being in continued process with them around once we've got the recommendations together. This is a timeline of the pieces that y'all thought needed to happen. And I did a little bit of shuffling around. So something that you might have proposed happen in April, I might have said, oh, I think that might need to happen this fall. So please feel free to push back on my pushback. And then so those are the purple circles, that's the timeline. And then the blue circles are some of the notes on how you want it to look, some of the action principles and steps that you suggested. And then these were the goals. So we'll start by reviewing the goals. To bring community voices into safety and wellness solutions, to improve community well-being by providing better responses to emergencies and by creating the support and resources to prevent emergencies, to make equity, healing, justice, safety, and wellness a reality for the most vulnerable among us, to get our city, county, school board leadership excited about non-carceral responses to social problems, to make recommendations to city and county government about how we want to impact the most lives with the funds possible, to co-create long-term systemic solutions to violence in our community and strengthen our collective belief that this change is possible, to implement alternatives to policing and criminalization that keep people safe and well. Now, acknowledging that we cannot accomplish this in the remainder of time that we have, does that still feel like the horizon for us? Maybe we could have like a quick check-in about whether that resonates. Is there something missing? I'm particularly hoping to hear from you, Alejandra. I know that we haven't yet updated our communication mechanisms to properly include you yet, and I apologize for that. And is there anything missing? Do those goals resonate, y'all? Thank you, Jesse.
Manju, I would just say maybe a goal coming out of this process is to create a mechanism for a kind of permanent version of these town hall charrettes, whatever, to continue beyond the life of the task force. That it's not just work sessions at the city council or work sessions at the county commission where the community gets to have their voices heard about community safety solutions, but an ongoing permanent version of this where the city and the county and the court and the police and the sheriff and the DA and the public defender and, et cetera, criminal justice research center would make themselves available to be heard, to hear from the community about what they want on issues of community safety and wellness. So, what we do is a model perhaps of how it could continue. We wouldn't be the ones running it, but but we can show that it works, and it's worth making it a kind of a permanent part of how our community hears from each other.
I'm trying to type up what you just said, and you said it so elegantly.
And I imagine we'll work that versions of that into our recommendations for how, processes for how community voice can continue to be heard on these issues beyond the life of our task force. And it may be multiple ways of doing it.
Yes. Oh, so for it, Xavier.
I was going to ask if we could possibly see those goals one more time.
Yeah, I'd asked in the chat if someone could provide the link that you're referencing, Manju, with this presentation. So I know I'm a visual person and I need to be able to look at it on my own instead of you manipulating it. So that would help me be able to engage more meaningfully.
You got it. This is me sharing it, and then let me also share the link with you. Shared that.
Yes, thank you. What I can share, if it's not too much, I think in the offline conversations that we had via email and over the phone, or at least via email, I think my gut reaction was, I think comprehensively our task force, through our roundtables and through our monthly meetings, I think we've done our best to create a lot of space for listening, and we've heard a lot, and it feels important to reflect that. And I couldn't at that time remember the exact timeline, but what I recalled was that the plan was to really focus on getting our recommendations as a complete task force, as a whole task force, complete by the end of the year, so that by 23, we were sharing that report out in the public and doing exactly what you're describing, and being able to give people the chance to hear what we say we've heard, so that folks can adjust, respond, so on and so forth. I don't want to go on record as being like against more listening, because I think we should always be in that posture of listening and reflecting and giving people chances to speak their truth and be heard. And I feel like I want us to do our faith.
So sorry, Jesse froze for me. Did Jesse freeze for y'all?
Yeah. I was like, am I frozen? Am I back now?
You're back.
Yeah, I want, while I think it's great to continue listening, what I was saying is that I want to make sure we are faithful with what we've already heard and do our due diligence to report that back and like complete that process. So I am mindful of like limited energies, and I know with my roundtable, the SRO roundtable, I should say, like we're not as far along in our recommendation process as crisis response roundtable has been. So it may be that
Jesse, we heard you up to, it may be that
the crisis response roundtable is in a better position to continue some of this comprehensive listening. I know the SRO roundtable is doing our best to complete the listening process that we're already engaged in. So, and I'm also, and I think this is where I looped Alejandra in, to make sure that the youth focused roundtable also has the space they need, I should say, to hit the ground running and make the most of the remainder of our time. So, and as a last point, in a phone conversation that Manju and I had as we were ideating more about this, it felt like it would be important in a potential conversation or potential town hall, maybe to center some of the youth in that conversation so that we know it directly aligns with what the Youth Focus Roundtable is doing. I am. Y'all, this Wi-Fi is like me. I'm tired. I've been going since 7:30 today, but hopefully y'all caught enough of what I said to keep it going. Just focusing ideally on the youth roundtable, a youth focus roundtable, and focusing on the youth perhaps in that event to make sure we're hearing from youth well and incorporate that feedback in our overall reporting. So thank
Jesse,
you.
you think you're like, if we're sticking to Manju's proposed timeline to do a town hall before January, you think it should be youth focused, since that's the roundtable that has the least amount of listening already done. Is that?
Yes.
And then we might do other ones later, like early in the year, like when you were saying the SRO roundtable, the rest of us would have more recommendations to put forward to the community to get feedback on. Perhaps the initial one early could be youth focused and probably be slightly more open-ended about not here's what we're coming up with, but what do you think we should do? Does that sound right?
Yes,
Got
that's the general gist of what Manju and I were starting to imagine to make the most of the limited time and energy that we have, and to keep things comprehensive, since that's really a part of what I think Manju was hoping for us to do, so it wouldn't be so kind of focused within our roundtables, the four, that's the initial four, but this might allow us to have some more generative conversations that really center youth in the ways that haven't been up until this more recent point, which is why we have this new roundtable, but still in a way that allows us to like be thinking about the overall report and product that we want to have completed so that we can really pass the batons well. I continue using that phrase because I feel like we received the baton and like we're running our race as faithfully as we can. And this race will continue after the task force concludes its work. And like conversations will continue happening formally and informally. So,
and that really addresses I wasn't a concern. I was just wanted to clarify when I saw Maju's plan that is this town hall charrette, is it more about us presenting the outlines of proposals we've come up with to get community feedback, or totally open-ended like the crisis response in the Bull City town hall was at the early part? And I think I was agreeing with you that at this point, we've done a lot of listening. We're getting more to the recommendation and getting community feedback and buy-in on those. So I think your idea for an initial one, youth focused, then if we did a second or even third one in the early in the year, it could be more about putting forward recommendations to get community responses too. So I think that could address your concern about, it's a little early by November or whatever for us to be doing it. And it would address mine that I don't think we want to open it up and have everybody tell us what the problems are in the general areas, because we're there now already. It's time to put forward the proposals we're coming up with. So I think we could accomplish both by an early version of this round town hall, and then maybe a second one or even a third one, resources and time permitting, later.
Thank you, Mike. And then one last piece that I remembered you lifting, Jesse, was just that this isn't the first time that Durham has gathered around questions of safety and wellness, and you offered the vision of the baton being passed to us, and wonder if we can think of our timeline as including some of that past, like if there are resources that people have found valuable in understanding some of the work that's come before that could also be helping shape our recommendations. Those would be great to start pooling those and sharing with each other. Xavier.
Yeah, I wanted to, the Youth Roundtable has had one meeting and there's some high level conversation, and I would like for some of them to kind of chime in on what they're hearing now, because they were talking about having a youth facing event at possibly. So those, because we are meeting in our collective silos, I want to make sure that they have some input into this larger conversation.
I could share a little bit from our last meeting. What I gathered from our last meeting, which I think we were all going to do some thinking and reflection individually before we came back and really made some decisions. But what I gathered was that doing listening sessions and trying to come up with some sort of community event felt like a lot before March. And it seemed like the group was leaning towards a community event that could also provide us some data or recommendations from youth specifically. And we had some ideas, but we hadn't really found anything concrete yet about that. But we talked about what kind of data already exists in the community in terms of youth, and not just youth in schools, but youth outside of schools. And our homework was to all find that data and bring that data back to our next meeting so we can start to, just see what we already have before we try to get more data.
Anyone else from that group want to chime in? If not, I was in that meeting. I've read the emails and the conversation around the original idea of having the town hall. And I just want to make sure that any concerns about youth-focused events, there is some plan to do that. And because the timeline for the Youth Roundtable is different than the others, if there are roundtables that would be ready in November, December, or January to do a town hall to say, hey, community, these are the things we're thinking about putting into our draft or placing in our draft. Give us some feedback. That does not mean that the Youth Roundtable needs to be ready at that point. That's the only point I want to lift out.
Thanks for that, Xavier.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to go back to sharing this draft timeline. And I appreciate that you asked for the link, Jesse, because this is very much like you can move the bubbles to where you think makes more sense. You could delete a bubble, you could add a bubble. I think it would be great if we were narrowing some because of the capacity questions. But also, actually, before we do this, I wanted to lift up for the public just a little bit about us. We have these 4 roundtables: school resource officers, violence interruption and de-escalation, criminal legal system, 911 and crisis response. And we just developed a 5th roundtable on youth. So sorry, it's not represented here, but it exists. And actually for the public, could we say who's on that one? The new youth roundtable?
You want us to just say our names? Alejandra?
Yeah, I think it's, hey, this is Alec. It's Alejandra, Alec. There you go. Samuel dropped it in the chat. And also Cecilia.
Alejandra, Alec, Samuel, Nori, and Cecilia. Thank you.
That's right.
And this was our mandate to accomplish our mission within 24 months, with the option of voting to add 6 months in order to complete our assignment with due care, time, and attention. Now we are in this orange zone of September, October. We have the option of adding more months up to September, October of 2023, if that's what's required to fulfill our assignment. And then here's the timeline that I was imagining might make sense, but this is flexible. And these were the steps that y'all said made most sense. I didn't really add much to what was proposed. So task force members contributed press coverage of our work so far, followed by space for conversations with elected liaisons and other city, county, and school leaders, October through December, working with community advocacy groups, November through December, on recommendations developed by then, but not yet presented. After those conversations, the feedback from Mike and Jesse, I wanted to roll out the idea of moving the November idea to January of this coming year. So early January 2023, safety and wellness in the Bull City Charrette with good food, interpretation, and childcare. I don't know who specified those things, but I love that we're naming the need for really being inclusive in our practice. And part of Mike's feedback, feel free to add more of the feedback you shared, Mike, but part of what you shared was, hey, the charrette, the famous charrette that took place in 1971 around ending segregation of Durham public schools, it was a process where people were building relationships within the container over time, like over 10 sessions, they worked together. We can't really call it a charrette if we're just getting together once, and I think that's right. So our roundtable had talked about asking each roundtable to reach out to everyone you reached out to for any of your listening sessions and inviting them to come together. So the idea would be the majority of the folks in the room would be people who've at least had one touch through a listening session of some kind. And then perhaps we could gather them again at least one more time at the end. But perhaps it could be a couple more times in between. So let's think about that together in terms of our capacity. But I think naming that element is really important. And Mike, am I correct in saying you're a historian?
Correct.
Is there anything more you want to add about that history?
Well, no, the names matter, but I think calling it a town hall is fine. You know, also the point of charrettes generally, and that one particularly, was to bring in stakeholders more into opposition to each other. So we'd have to be intentional, and maybe we would want to be to bring in people who have not been part of our discussion. If you wanted it to be a charrette, but again, it doesn't. I think you're getting at a more important point than that. Now, to my earlier point, I think we could, part of our proposal of what could live on in a permanent form of community accessibility and accountability around community safety could very well be charrettes that the city and the county and community partners would host, in perpetuity to do that. I would, to your point about moving the timeline of it, I totally agree with Jesse. I think an initial youth-focused one would be great, and I would just defer to the new roundtable, to them about when they think that would be, the timing of that would fit best with what they're hoping to accomplish, and hearing community voices on youth-focused youth issues that can form their evolving proposals. But then the kind of a guest list, as it were, as you're saying, for maybe a January one or whatever, that makes total sense, that we can reach out to the folks we've already engaged on listening sessions on our topics and get them in the room with each other to talk about other community safety. Like, we had listening sessions with family members of homicide victims, but I think they would lend great perspectives to other elements of crisis response, et cetera, because they've already been primed to think about problems and solutions. And I'm sure it would go the other way. The people we're talking to about bail reform and and alternative, all those kind of things, people who you've been listening to and the SRO roundtable have been listening to, they would have good, fresh perspectives and a fresh eye on proposals we've been developing along those lines. So I think that makes sense for it's community input, but it's input by community folk who've already been primed. They know what a listening session is like. They've already been thinking about these things.
And what you just said about the history of Durham's famous 71 charrette, including voices that profoundly opposed each other at the beginning and through listening found common ground, really resonates with what Jesse shared in our one-on-one about making sure that folks don't have to all share one perspective to be invited into the room, right? Like that we actually are going to come out with stronger proposals with broader resonance if we really invite people with a lot of different perspectives to come to the table and be in dialogue with each other. That's really authentic and depthful and doesn't shy away from the places of complexity. And
yeah, now it doesn't mean they'd show up, but you have to invite the cops and the sheriff and the DA, and maybe they would choose to sit on the sidelines and complain, but that's their doing. That's not for lack of invitation.
Anyone want to add anything to this before we continue with the timeline piece? Q&As, please check it. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just about.
Can we define what a charrette is? That's not a term I'm familiar with. Thank you. Maybe Xavier, Marcia.
I don't assume, did Mike not do that a minute ago? Did the Q&A come after, before he?
I think it was simultaneous, as it was kind of related. Yeah, so I don't know if it bears repeating, but if someone can.
Yeah, I'm not the
It's a design term. It's like borrowed from the architectural community, and the idea is like, oh, there's a design quandary that we really need to wrap our heads around. So let's get everyone at every level of a project around a table, and we're going to just close the door and hammer it out until we solve the puzzle. And does anyone want to share anything else that you know from history or practice around this?
Borrows a lot of, it borrows because restorative justice has been around for a long time, but it uses similar kinds of principles in the way voices are heard and solutions are attempted. But it's, a group of people usually with not just varied, but opposing viewpoints to get in a room and hear each other with a view of creating some sort of resolution, as in like written resolution in the case of 71 on a particular topic. They know the topic going in, and they're hoping to get to common ground and compromise statement on that at the end. And it's overseen by a person or persons who are trained in that kind of process. And it takes a while. I mean, that one, as you said, took weeks. And the stakes were obviously pretty high.
That took 10 sessions, and maybe we might be thinking more like 3 or 4 sessions.
Yeah.
And
the city were committed. I mean, there was a commitment on the front end that we're going to listen to what these people say, school board, et cetera. We're not just going to thank you and put it on the shelf. So that's another difficult part of the front end. You got people sitting down and spending all the time after the sense this is going to turn into something. The people who matter are going to listen to this.
Thank you. And we have a community reminder that the public can't see things that are dropped into the chat that we say hosts and attendees. They can only see what we chat into the to field needs to say everyone. Does that make sense to all of us? Okay.
I'd like to just in this pause, Andrew, if I could, just it would be very helpful for me at least that this conversation takes us to a place where we can think about some way we can take the timeline and make it actionable. And so if the discussion is going to continue to be on the timeline, I would love to make sure that we have other voices who have not chimed in yet. If there's some concerns about it or some things they're excited about, this is an open discussion, guys.
Thank you. So returning to the timeline, perhaps we have this safety and wellness in the Bull City Charrette in January. Could happen November or December if folks were actually collectively excited about that. Finalized proposals from roundtables by March 2023. So that gives us some time between January to March to synthesize what we're hearing and do some collective writing. And my dear mentor, Mab Segrist, really believes in the value of a strong outline when we're doing collective writing. So maybe thinking about who might be able to help us develop that outline and do our work into the same document. Someone also shared a piece about endorsements of recommendations from previous task forces. So let's return to understand more who put that, what you meant. But then begin informational campaign by March 2023 and wrap by May 2023. So I pushed that a little forward. I said, I think we might need more time to just get the word out about what we've developed. And I'm thinking not that we do a ton more work, but that we do maybe less, but in a more paced way over time. And then thinking early June, having a safety and wellness in the Bull City celebration with good food, interpretation, and childcare, reconvening all the folks who we've been building with over the last 24 to 30 months, and inviting them to party together. Particularly because of this idea that someone shared around big ships are slow to turn. Much of our vision, though not all, is long-term implementation, long-term outcomes. So thinking about, like, one of the most important tasks here is to make sure that the community feels greater ownership at the end of this process around the principles of safety and wellness, and shaping that together. So Xavier, thanks for inviting us to think about the timeline really as actionable. If there's parts that when you look at it, it just exhausts you, maybe doesn't make sense to be on our timeline. Or if you're like, ooh, there's a really important missing piece, name that now. And if you're like, ooh, this part just makes my heart sing, I bet our roundtable would like to claim that piece and make it happen. Say that too.
I have a couple clarifying questions. Is the town hall or the charrette, is that how you say it, for January meant to be multiple events or one event? Multiple?
That's a question for us.
Okay.
I think one way we could think about it is that this bigger process is a charrette that's had a lot of different listening components that we're like bringing those various tributaries into one big river. And the confluence is this safety and wellness in the Bull City charrette gathering in January. Our thought as a roundtable, our conversation was like, okay, there's really important conversations happening around SROs, around crisis response, around courts and the legal system, around violence interruption, around youth. But some of how we as community members experience safety and wellness in our bodies, in our lives, might spill across those categories or outside of those categories. And there might be folks who've been watching this process, hearing about it in the paper and wondering where to enter. And we're wondering if this could be like a kind of broad invitation, just throw the doors wide open to say, if you want to enter the conversation, there's going to be a big tent about safety and wellness, however that shows up for you in your neighborhood, in your home, in your house of faith, in your whatever space you inhabit, at your school. So that's doing something Mike is maybe hoping we don't do, which is inviting broader input that might echo some of the stuff we've already heard. I think our roundtable is saying that feels worth it if more people feel a sense of buy-in of the process, and if that invitation encourages them to then return to the table once we have a proposal to figure out how to get their neighborhood association to sit and circle around the recommendations and figure out how they're going to breathe some life into our ideas. And by our ideas, I mean the big Durham's ideas about safety and wellness. Jesse.
Yeah, just listening, I was starting to imagine, like, if we could like utilize one of like the high schools and just like be all up in there on a Saturday, and we divvy up, and like each classroom is like one or two task force members, and then we're able to like go through the completed report with a group of community members. And so there are multiple conversations, because I think like if we really do a good job and gather some kind of comprehensive amount of people, I don't know that it would be effective that all of us are in one room. But maybe there are multiple conversations. Maybe some of us are just on Zoom because that might be better for some folks. Shout out to Tilde, because I feel like they've been really helpful when we've needed to accommodate Spanish speakers and English speakers and figure out how to like get them all together, so that might be another resource that we activate in that. I think, mind you, in your initial imagination, it was like one in-person moment and one virtual moment, but maybe it's a bit more dynamic so that there are like multiple in-person moments and virtual moments happening concurrently, so that the report is getting out there in that strategic way. And then it's on us to be able to like assemble that. I know we're in the process of hiring research assistants who will have dedicated time, and I think like they will be really helpful to us to like make sure we're collecting that information and it's organized, and making sure we're analyzing it in a less biased way. And like I could see them being really helpful to make sure we have the appropriate tools and mechanisms in place to collect the data that we would get at that sort of town hall charrette moment, at least for like reporting back what we've heard. Alejandra, to your question, and I echo what Mike said, I think like whatever the youth focused roundtable does, or whatever we do together in support of what y'all are doing, I really think should be like based on what works for y'all. So if that's in 22, great. If that's in 23, great. So I hope that you don't feel, and others, Alec, Samuel, don't feel like pressure to sort of improperly integrate what we're talking about with what y'all are doing, which is why I guess in my mind, if anything happened sooner, I figured it would be focused on what y'all wanted. But if sooner still feels like too soon for you all, then again, it sounds like we should focus on completing our report based on what we've been able to hear amongst the initial 4 roundtables. And then by next year, we're in a process to continue that listening and in part share what we've heard, like, and confirm that we've been listening well. So I'm just sharing all of that, and I'm done there.
Thank you. I heard a direct question in there to Alejandra, Alec, Samuel. Would it be helpful to have a convening of this kind happen November, December, so that we could put to use that idea of like really centering youth voices and using it as like a youth listening session? Or does January feel more realistic for your working group, or something different?
I think, oh, go ahead, Samuel.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just gonna say, I'm trying to think in terms of like time span, because I know there are a few different like holiday breaks that are coming up as well that kind of bite into our time. as a group. I know that November time would be ideal, but I still feel inclined for that January time, but I can step back and see how my other roundtable members feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of unite with that also, just in terms of, I mean, we were also, to be fair, and we might backpedal on this when we meet next, but we had kind of a grand vision for what a youth convening would look like that was really youth centric. We talked about performances, we talked about art, we talked about basketball and skateboarding tournament. We talked about really attracting young folks to the space, and to do that properly. And again, we may be in over our heads with something like that, but to do that well, that feels more challenging before the end of the calendar year.
And I wonder if we did like January and youth show up, assuming that there are youth there, if they could partake in our planning of this grand idea that we have. And maybe we could have something in the works and they could give some input there. That would be useful input.
When have y'all been thinking about grand happening?
We talked about March, to be honest. And again, there's only one meeting and it was very high level. We talked about March. And I'm just wondering if that should be just another dot in our timeline, as opposed to trying to fit what they're talking about into what you currently have. And then it can move around as needed. Because the youth roundtable work is very fluid at this moment. But I love the idea of, if the other roundtables have a January session, inviting youth input for the March session or April session or whenever it happens. I think that's what I'm hearing from the group. They're being very quiet today.
It could also be a recommendation, like we propose that city, county, and school board hook up the resources for our community to have a youth convening of this kind.
As in one, we'd propose early, mind you, that they would approve, and not in April, but like something we'd get to them in a month or two or whatever, so they could say yes.
Yeah, if that feels helpful and supportive to what y'all are envisioning.
Yeah.
Folks who haven't shared anything so far want to speak up? And if it feels helpful for me to share the timeline again, I can.
Timeline looks great. Thank you for walking us through that.
Are you leaning towards yes on charrette or no on charrette, a particular format or timing for that, Isa?
Maybe I'd misunderstood the timeline. We were talking about doing that in January. Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah, that time that I would have capacity for that. And I don't really have thoughts on the format.
I really like the idea. I agree with what Jesse said earlier about having a high school kind of host this event and having breakout rooms where we as roundtable folks can be in there and welcome community in and have conversation. So I like it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do have questions on two specific bubbles, and would love to hear some input on those two. The one about having conversations with elected liaisons and other city council and school leaders between October and December, as well as working with community advocacy groups. To me, those are two very actionable, someone needs to be assigned this work type of pieces of the timeline. I will say that we've already started that process in October with we were summoned, Marcia and I was summoned to the city council, the joint city council meeting. They meet quarterly. And so it was around this time last year that we appeared before them also. And so that is something that we do as a part of what we are charged with as the co-chairs. But if there's to be a larger effort in that, we need to identify some persons that can get together and do a strategy. I think that's just my opinion, as well as a plan for working with community advocacy groups. Because by the time we meet again, beloved ones, it will be November. So I'm just trying to put it out there. If there's some things that are including space between today's meeting and the November meeting, it'd be nice to have some persons attached to those items if we choose to do that. Does that make sense? I'm trying not to be
It does
pushy.
make sense.
I'm not
And
trying
then
to be
there was
pushy,
also
but time is not on our side.
absolutely right. Thank you. And then also there was this one, endorsements of recommendations from previous task forces. Does someone who
Yeah.
shared that mind explaining a little more?
I don't know who wrote that, but I think that that's a great idea. And we've already sort of done it.
Right.
Right? We have taken the
That's-
North Carolina Task Force on Racial Equity in Criminal Justice and the Durham Racial Equity Task Force and have looked at those recommendations. Allison did that for us and just connected them with the roundtable. So, that's really helpful. And that's something, I hope is folded into our recommendations and what we're doing.
Yeah, I think similarly in our process, we have been working with community advocacy groups, working with strategic, creative community members that have assets to bear. I know I've gone to Mayor Elaine's office hours. I've met with Councilmember Hyman. I've had lunch with Commissioner Howerton. I've had a meal with Namashina. So these things I think are happening formally and informally. And I don't necessarily know that we need to assign a responsibility. It's more about just naming with greater clarity how we are effectively engaging multiple audiences in the work. And hopefully that will be reflected in the products that we create, be it a report or, a town hall or a charrette, just being able to uplift and amplify what we've already been hearing and doing so well. So yeah, I feel like those things are already happening.
And that we intentionally built that part of the recommendation template for that very making note of those consults. So I think that'll make it easier for, Dwayne, whoever gets stuck, or one of the RAs who will put together our various accumulating proposals, and they can pull out what Jesse's talking about. And in our introduction, we could say in the process, we've had multiple meetings and listening sessions and consultations as roundtables and individuals, with all the following, to develop our proposals.
Can I ask whoever wrote the thing about meeting with electeds, if you could share kind of what you were thinking about as the purpose of that step? Is it primarily around relationship building? Is it eliciting feedback on existing proposals or hearing their visions for community safety and wellness too?
Thinking that person may not be amongst us today.
Okay. Does anyone have thoughts about kind of what you hope would happen in building with electeds at this stage before we have a
I
proposal?
can really briefly. I think, especially for the folks that are named liaisons, even more so, but just in general, these are the folks that like have been elected, are in a position to like actually pass laws and budget lines and all that kind of thing. And so it feels important to keep communication lines open and just share very candidly and formally, like, hey, here's what's happening, here's what we're thinking, here's what we're seeing, what are you seeing, what do you know? And I felt like in my conversation with Commissioner Burns, you know, she was listening to me well and like affirming the work that we've been doing and appreciating what we've been doing and the posture that we hold, as well as
I feel like Jesse's sound drops at the most like tantalizing part. What is she gonna say
this
next?
Wi-Fi. But I was just saying that like she was like affirming what we've been doing while also offering additional perspective. Okay, she was offering additional perspective about
Jesse, if I could invite you to put it in the chat, we're dying to know.
I'm gonna try one more time. Just
Okay, go
saying
for
that
it.
she was affirming what we were doing.
I'm sorry, we missed it. So sorry. The internet is not a kind place. I'm so sorry. And then the other bubble that you were saying, let's get more specific, Xavier, was working with community advocacy groups November through December on recommendations developed by then, but not yet presented. And you were saying if we want to do that, we need to do that right away. It's almost 7, and I know that we talked about some of these groups, and then I received a really helpful list of organizations that the Community Safety Department has been partnering with to connect with residents, and we could add those organizations to the list. I wonder if y'all would be willing to add organizations, institutions, spaces that have been valuable for you as a roundtable to the list. And I wonder if we could just figure out a kind of decentralized way to be making the invitation and having one-on-ones with those folks. Or Xavier, are you hoping we can get more nuts and bolts about it and have specific people agreeing to connect with specific organizations at this meeting?
It's at the pleasure of the group. I mean, it could be as simple as having a specific list that your co-chairs are charged with reaching out to electronically even. Here are updates. I mean, just the fact that we had a commissioner, and we'll do an update on that joint city county meeting, but a commissioner said I wasn't aware of where to find the quarterly reports, for instance. That type of thing, just making sure we push out highlights of our work so far. It could be just that simple. It's the pleasure of the task force. Marcia and I can take that bubble and push it out, but we know that the two of us can't meet with everybody that you've listed. It's not. I don't think that's realistic from a capacity standpoint. But if there is a official update that we should send specifically to leaders of these groups, that's one way of doing it. But if you'd like something more, join the team.
Oh, Dr. Boone.
So I'm the Health and Safety Chair for the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People. So I've been mentioning the task force, and I'll continue to do so with a wider perspective, perhaps than before.
Thank
That's
you.
another
So,
great orientation, is like all of us just claiming our own organizations that we are also serving in as places. Thank you for modeling that.
And I'm also on the advisory committee for the whole schools. So, they are very much aware of what we're doing. Cecilia wasn't able to come tonight, but we will invite her back.
What do y'all think about, like, taking to heart what I think Jesse was saying, like offering some virtual way to give input? What do y'all think about offering like a kind of digital input portal on the safety and wellness website that the city has for our task force, like where people could go and give answers to maybe like 2 simple questions around safety and wellness and what folks would like to see. So even if you can't make it to an in-person event or a Zoom thing, you can just type up a quick answer on your phone.
Yeah, why not? And or to Xavier's earlier point, especially if that says, and if you'd like to really get into the weeds and read quarterly reports and give feedback on specific proposals about to be or have been proposed, that too. So there could be the 30,000 foot basic open-ended questions. And if you want to review, and they can see all the options. Oh, I'm most interested in this topic or that topic, and give us feedback that way. Yeah, why not?
And that's the sort of thing that
one of our RAs who can then, the 4 new RAs whose responsibility can be to be tracking that and keeping, and minding it and passing along the content from it.
And that's the sort of thing where if we set it up soon, Dr. Wanda could like hold space at a Durham committee meeting for folks to take a moment, share their input straight into the portal, and then even if they can't make it to one of the charrette sessions, they're able to contribute.
Yeah, I just want to be mindful of who may go to the website and the link. There's still people who communicate via paper. And our community may be most of those people. So while we're thinking about technological kinds of ways to interact, we really need to consider how we can be more boots on the ground and provide information in a way that supports the most marginalized people in our community.
I love that. Is there resonance around this idea of figuring out a paper version and a digital version of some simple question around what are your visions for safety and wellness for the Bull City? And introducing that like really soon, like maybe November, so we can be receiving feedback through that between now and January.
And I have one more thing, and that is the frustration for those of us who are involved in community. I believe we all are. The frustration that people have at this point of we see what's going on. What do you mean you want me to tell you what I'd like to see in terms of safety? So if there's a way to couch it in a way that we are here together, we're experiencing this together, these are the things that we have already heard from the community, because I don't want us to come across as having heard it for the first time or having, seeming that way. So, to be real and human about this process and to see that we have been listening. And because we have been listening, these are the things that we have found to be true. And so we're working on them in this way. But we realize we don't have all the answers. And so we really need you. We really do need you to help us as we're closing out or moving along, or, you know, however we might want to say that.
I really appreciate that, Dr. Boone. I feel like so many community members shared that they feel totally surveyed out and still unheard. And the way you framed that was so beautiful.
Yeah, it may be too that, like, because I feel like a part of what this is, it's a bit meta, but like, in order to like be a community, you have to like be a community, you know? And so when we're just thinking about like, what's the end product that we need, this report, this data, we can easily miss out on like the community practices that actually like already give us that data. And like, it may help us in, as we're just continuing to ideate and coordinate these plans, like maybe it's not as formal of a conversation, like maybe it's like sharing meals, or maybe it's, you know, a creative art piece that we're all making. I don't know, it could be a lot of different things that allow people to have conversations and build trust. And in that process, we're getting the answer to the questions. And yeah, that takes time, that takes trust. I think that takes creativity. And it may not necessarily be for us to do alone or to try and do it all, but to affirm that posture and that set of practices, so that even beyond the life of the task force, there's more of that kind of listening and engaging and community happening. Yeah.
Just want to hold space, Shanice, Alec, anyone else who hasn't maybe shared as much so far, Samuel. And thank you for this contribution from Rose, who shares from the chat. Any thoughts about door knocking? I know that's really time intensive, but could reach hard to reach people, maybe with a pamphlet describing initial recommendations and what we already know, to Dr. Boone's point. Thank you, Rose.
Yeah, I don't think there's one way to do it. And I think there are actually multiple.
Amen. Multiple ways to get it done.
I love y'all.
Just lifting up what Mike shared in the chat. Well said, Dr. Boone. That requires community folks to do more reading of what we've already heard, learned, done, and are planning to do, to opine on that, rather than a simple open-ended question on that, than a simple open-ended question about community safety. But it will yield better results and make the respondents feel their more focused responses are serving an end. Okay, this feels like so much good stuff to work with. Thanks all of y'all for pitching in. Shanice, Alec, was there anything you wanted to add before we wrap this piece? Samuel, did you want to?
Yes, I just said, I think we can send out the information on all fronts. I know the virtual option was offered online, but also in terms of like Dr. Boone was mentioning before, reaching people that aren't using online, you know, resources and stuff like that, reaching them in person, providing paper copies and stuff like that, either through mail or just from in-person delivery. I think we can deliver all the information in all those different avenues. It just takes the right time and planning on our part to do it, I think.
And I said, just remember, we've got 4 new RAs coming on board, and this seems like an entirely appropriate task for one or more of those. We call them research assistants, but they're assisting the task force. And I know from, reading and interviewing some of them, a lot of them have experience in exactly this kind of thing, not just, survey analysis.
Awesome. And we talked about social media too. Folks referenced that in the outreach action steps. Shanice or Alec, anything you want to chime in before we wrap this? Or am I missing anyone else? All right, the circle is so wise. Thank you.
Thank you, Manji, for facilitating that. I just want to bring back to everyone's spirit that the document that we were looking at, what I call the bubbles, was a co-created document from our own inputs. We were looking at if there's any messiness around it. She did such a great job of organizing it for us into that timeline and the group. So I really appreciate that. I like Jesse visual. I live off a musical score where it's just there, and then I can get to improvise around it. And you've put it into a place where I can tell where the chorus is versus the verses. And that was so helpful for me. And now I've got pages and pages of notes. Plus, I'm going to probably have to look back at this recording. So when Marcia, Dwayne, and I get together for planning, kind of glean out the most pertinent ideas that were brought up. But thank you. I have this, because I work in the community space in my job. I have this unknown quote that says, "Big ideas are generated by listening and learning from the community, and it's complicated." And so I hope that tonight's conversation has been constructive for you. It really, for me, helped kind of narrow down where we're trying to get and how we're going to get there as we are moving toward the end of this work. The one thing I didn't bring up that I was waiting for someone else to say, and nobody said it, so I'm talking way too much already, is you threw in some May and June stuff, and I'm like, I think I'm done in April. So if there's some taste for a 2-month extension, somebody better say so. And so we can discuss that as well. But I do.
Well, and that's a vote, right? It would have to be a vote.
I'm sorry?
And that would have to be a vote, and that would need to be approved by electeds, correct?
Yeah.
It's a vote with 3/4 of in favor of the extension and approved by city council, well, the 3 elected bodies.
Here's my case for an extension till June. I think it will be more easeful on our bodies to not be racing to try and get this done by April. And my sense is that we've all been pushing really hard and are tired. So I actually think that extending the deadline a little later will soften the load, but folks might feel like being done sooner feels better. So let speak up.
So I just want to put, you don't even have to respond to right now, but I want to put that in your minds. But the word I wrote down around that is, someone mentioned the term community ownership. And for me, if we were doing an extension, it would be to solidify community ownership in the work. And again, being out in the community a little bit longer, just to make sure that no one feels unheard, or there's no one out there that doesn't have an opportunity to hear what we are doing and what we would have done. So I'm sure I'm thinking we should possibly really talk about that as an agenda item in our next meeting, since there are others have to approve that. That just leaves us with our announcements, if there's no other conversation on that. But again, I really appreciate all of that, and having the visual was very helpful. We have some announcements. I'll start with the one that wasn't on the agenda. I was just reminded that we need to have our 6th quarterly report due on Friday, November 11th. If somebody can throw that in the chat. I know it's the last thing everybody wanted to hear, like, not another report. But this is what we are required to do these. So Friday, November the 11th is the due dates for all of our roundtables to submit for our quarterly report. And then I'll just jump to this city and county meeting that we presented, Marsha and I presented. I don't know what day that was. Was it yesterday?
It was
There's no way.
yesterday. Yes,
God,
it was
feels like 3
yesterday.
weeks ago. But we were able to give them basically a high level overview of what we've done over the last 10 months or so, the people that we've talked to, the people that we as a group have talked to as a task force and as roundtables, the prescriptions for repair that was approved, and ideas about how the Office of Survivor Care could go right behind that once it's done. And we just were able to give them some, just stay on their radar. You know, this was about having a time that the city and county normally meet. And they asked us to come to present. We were well received. It's just, you know, in my opinion, always good to just stay on the radar of those who have appointed us here. If you have any reflections, Marsha or Jillian, you were there as well, Dwayne, before I move on.
Jillian, would you like to share your experience of that? You chaired that meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, y'all did a great job. I think folks were very receptive to what you were saying. It was good to just get an update and hear a little bit more about the work. And yeah, I think, you know, people were supportive and excited and interested in what y'all were saying. And yeah, you did a great job presenting. Really appreciate hearing from y'all in that kind of sort of more awkward formal space. But yes. It was good. Yeah.
Good. Well,
we hadn't had an in-person meeting since before COVID. So y'all were, that was the first joint city county we've done in person in a long time.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought it was great to have the reception that people recognize that the question was asked, like, what do we tell people when they've been harmed by violence? Where do we tell them to go? And immediately people from those elected officials said, where? Nowhere. And so I think that was really powerful, that we, in fact, as a community, do not have a place for people who are survivors of harm and violence in particular. So that gave me great hope for that going forward.
So Marsha, I was actually just typing that. So did you guys present the Office of Survivor Care proposal, or just gave a broad overview of it? And if that was general reception, do you plan to present the actual approved Office of Survivor Care proposal to the city and the county before the end of the year? Or is that going to be part of our big package of proposals come spring?
I see that more as a package. Yeah, and I think what came out of that is to maybe enlarge our vision of not, maybe if the city does not have capacity, maybe the county does. In other words, just to, you know, to keep that alive. But I don't think that we're going to ask for what was made clear to us the last time we were in front of the city is that the money that they have put aside is really specifically for listening sessions, translations, town halls, meetings, that to do proposals that have big budgets. That's not the purpose of that money. It's to do individual. Go ahead, Jillian. Yeah.
So I think the purpose of that money was to implement y'all's recommendations. I think it's that there have been some leadership changes since that money was designated. And so our intentions are no longer necessarily going to be honored, but the intentions were to fund the recommendations of the task force. I just, unfortunately, am no longer in a position to guarantee that will get the support of enough council members to actually happen.
That's right. Which behooves us as a task force, I think, to be ongoing advocates. So when our term ends, that we will be in a very important position to advocate for those recommendations to get funded. You know, again, it's sort of a new beginning. It will be a new beginning because they will not. I don't see that in the immediate future.
But I mean, you independent of using task force funds to fund their Office of Survivor Care, the more general point, Marsha, is you think your wise judgment is presenting that proposal to them sooner isn't going to help its chances. The longer it waits, the more it's part of a package, the more likely it's going to get considered.
Correct.
Okay.
That's exactly
Makes
right.
sense.
And
It's not going to get
also-
lost in the shuffle. Just more time's only going to help it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that we really want to wait and listen to gun violence
Right. The
survivors, right?
prescriptions for repair process
Correct.
is only going to help the reception of that later one.
Well, we need to know. Yeah,
Right.
we need to honor what we've heard from in our listening. Yeah, exactly.
And since you've talked about prescriptions for repair, Marcia, can you go ahead and give us the update on that as well as the ethnodrama recommendation?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. We are going forward. We had our interviews today for a coordinator, made a decision that's going to Duke HR since it's being held there as opposed to the city. And so we are thrilled with the new coordinator, Durham native. Well, we'll see. We can't announce until we can announce. But the candidates were fantastic, and we're on time. We're just on time. It's working out beautifully. So that's great. And on the ethnodramas, we are talking about maybe Wanda, Sam, you can add to this, but it's shifted. And so one thing that I know that we've talked about, Xavier and Dwayne and I, is looking at ethnodramas also in the context of how the role of arts in peacemaking and in healing, and to have hopefully create even a broader recommendation to really fulfill, to really have something very compelling and very complete to present to the Durham community about arts and drama and how that creates belonging and therefore safety and wellness. Would you like to add anything, Wanda?
I don't necessarily have anything to add. I will say that the ethnodramas also include referral to services. As you know, the services are not tri-services, but NC Care 360. I wanted to make sure that there was no misunderstanding around that. To be delivered in a celebratory fashion within the community. So I don't see where adding arts, all kinds of arts and music and, whatever arts look like, I don't see where that really interrupts or changes the view of ethnodramas and their impact in the community. But I do feel like ethnodramas have a central impact because of what they bring, and with all of those other arts things surrounding that. So if that's what we're talking about, then, I think it's fantastic. If it's something else, I'd need to think about it a little bit, but I feel like if that's what we're doing, then I think it would be celebratory and very impactful for the community with the ethnodrama at the center.
Thank you.
I put in the chat a link. It is for a ethnodrama program that's happening this weekend called Kites. It's a live production showcasing the lived experience of opioid users. There are some local organizations, Be Connected Durham and The Art Chose Me are hosting a reception in relation to this work at Hayti. There are a lot of different folks that are connected to it through Duke, through NCCU. And I think ethnodrama might be a word that like folks haven't heard before, kind of like charrette, and you're like, what is this? And I think participating in this event might also help folks better understand what folks mean when they say ethnodrama and why we feel this could be a transformative experience for providing more safe, more well, interventions and interruptions to violence. So I just wanted to lift that up. I know that Crystal was a part of this program as well. And there are several others that were engaged. So it just feels like a great opportunity to potentially connect some dots so that folks better understand, folks in community really understand what we're talking about when we say these words.
Mhm.
So you can look it up. It's a free event. If you look up KITES, KITES, and Be Connected Durham, if you Google it, you should see it.
Thank you for saying that, Jesse. And there is a panel that happens after this. So there's more communication and dialogue afterwards about the topic at hand. The one that we were talking about for this roundtable had to do with violence. However,
Right.
and what's not connected to violence. So this is appropriate as well. And I do also encourage you to attend. There are actually 3 sessions, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And we can make sure that you have that information. And those of you out there, and actually I'm gonna look for it now before this closes out, so you'll have that. If you don't already have it, Jesse.
That's great. Yes, and Crystal is also has music. I mean, she's an inspiration. Concerts. She's a culture person, curator.
Thank you. Manju has also placed a Eventbrite link for a choreo poem. Is that right? Did I say it right? Choreo poem is coming up. What's the date of that, Manju?
It's in November. Let me click on it.
So
Friday, November 11th. Friday, November 11th, 7:30 p.m. at North Star Church of the Arts.
There are multiple of dates. It's the 11th, 18th, 19th at 7:30, and then the 12th, 13th, and 20th at 3 p.m. So
thank you.
I have several friends that are going to be there. So that's been on my radar.
And also the city of Durham. Is this the announcements period? Is this okay that I'm going off? Okay. City of Durham is holding a public forum at 6 p.m. on November 14th at the Edison Johnson Recreation Center, the day before ShotSpotter gunshot detection surveillance technology is projected to go live in Durham.
Thank you.
Please speak up against this atrocity.
And if we're doing more announcements this Saturday, and I'll put it in the chat after I speak, is the annual Vigil to honor the 49 neighbors who were taken by violence last year. It's going to be outside and at the corner of East Trinity and North Elizabeth Street at the Elizabeth Street United Methodist Church, but in the parking lot or grounds. And I hope everyone feels welcome and can attend. That's great. And there'll be also, and I'll send this out as well in November, at the Carolina Theater, a short film on the death penalty, and then a panel, which is also perfect for us in how to stop violence. It's in the hopes of abolishing the death penalty.
Thank you. If you would quickly put those in the chat because we are at time, and Dwayne will close this meeting out so fast we'll never get it in the chat. But Dwayne, are we? As far the only announcement we had left on our agenda was the research assistance update. Could you tell us where we are on that?
The committee will be meeting next week. Jennifer should be back. Mike is back. I'll be sending out an invite. More than likely, I'll choose 9 a.m. Tuesday morning because that's already a set time for us. if you won't be able to make it. Well, to be transparent, the panel was Jesse, Mike, Dr. Boone, Jennifer, Marsha, Xavier. And we've done all the interviews now. And we'll be making a decision on which 4 candidates. The 4 candidates who will be selected, we will just have to send their names to the City of Durham's HR, and then the City of Durham will deal with everything after that. Their orientation will be Monday and Tuesday, October 31st and November 1st. And then, of course, they will be working with the task force thereafter.
You said we're gonna do that at 9 a.m. on Tuesday the 18th?
If you're available. If you're not available, Jesse, you just send your 4 preferred candidates. We're trying to be accommodating of your very busy schedule, sir.
I'm available. We can talk more offline. Thank you.
And thank you all for your time, your attention, your input. And those of you who want to save the chat, better hurry before Dwayne cuts this thing off. But we are adjourned. And I hope you have a great evening and a great rest of the week.